Hello, and welcome to the You Are Loved Ministry podcast. I'm here today with my wonderful friend Pam Baggett. And today we're going to be reading from 1 Samuel chapter 25, starting with verse 2. Now, at this time in scripture, David had been anointed as king when he was just a boy. However, King Saul was still alive and serving as king, but Saul kind of had some mental problems, and that made David's life very difficult. Can you talk about that for a minute, Pam?
Well, the young shepherd boy who saved his people by trusting God and killing the giant was appreciated by King Saul at first, and he was a treasured friend of Saul's son, Jonathan. But things changed over the next few years. Saul sent David to lead armies in battle, and David did well for him. But when Saul heard that the people were praising David more than Saul, his pride and jealousy led him to turn against David.
Mm.
In 1 Samuel 18, we read more than once that Saul realized God was with David and not himself, and this made him afraid and determined to kill David. David had about 400 of his men were having to live in hiding, but David kept respecting Saul and working for the people of Israel, fighting their enemies and helping with their troubles.
That's pretty amazing, though, don't you think? I mean,
It says an awful
to
lot
to
about
know that
character.
you're supposed to be king and that the real king is a little bit on the crazy side, and
A
here
lot.
you are in hiding, and yet David was still honoring God because he had not replaced Saul as king yet. He was still waiting his turn. That's
Yeah.
very admirable.
Well, despite David's good deeds and his demonstration of respect and
Mhm.
compassion for Saul went back and forth between appreciating David and desperately wanting to kill him. And I think psychology experts today would see the possibility of a couple of types of mental disorders in him. But for David, life was on the run, and he and his men needed help from people who would provide food and other necessities for them. So let's see what happened in 1 Samuel 25, 2 through 8. And I just moved it. There we go. And there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel. The man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail. The woman was discerning and beautiful, but the man was harsh and badly behaved. He was a Calebite. David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, "Go up to Carmel and go to Nabal and greet him in my name, and thus you shall greet him. Peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. I hear that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm, and they missed nothing all the time they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son David." Okay, sheep shearing took place as spring began, and
Mm.
the cold winter was done. It was a joyful time, and there was a long annual feast to celebrate it. It was kind of like a harvest festival celebrating good crops.
Mm.
Shearing celebrated the blessings of wool and newness and surviving winter. But David and his men had protected Nabal's men from animals and thieves while they tended the sheep. So David felt that at a time of abundance, it was reasonable to ask Nabal to return the favor, especially since it was also customary to have a feast fit for royalty.
Mm.
And much of Israel recognized David as a king.
I love this story, but I kind of feel sorry for Abigail. I mean, here she is, the scripture tells us that she's discerning and she's beautiful, but she's married to a man who's hard to get along with, but she's still hanging in there. Other translations call her intelligent with good understanding. I think we would call her wise.
Mhm.
Now, she's married to a rich man, and he's a businessman because he owns 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. So that's not a pauper. That's a guy that's got some stuff. And so that would mean that they would also have a lot of servants because, I'm sure Nabal's not out there taking care of those sheep all by himself and the goats. And so when we begin the story, they're about to celebrate, to shear those sheep. And as you said, it's a time of celebration and fasting. And
Feasting, not fasting.
oh, sorry, feasting. You're right. Fasting is totally opposite. I don't fast very often.
Not many people do.
um, and so they were getting ready to have a big party. And part of the reason why the sheep herders and the sheep were well taken care of was because David's men had been doing that. They'd been helping out. So it's like, we helped with this situation. You're having a party. You should invite us. But they didn't come in demanding stuff. They didn't say, we want this and this and that. He just said, whatever is available. They weren't asking for charity, because David and his men had earned all of this. And so you would think that it would be like, oh, sure, we'll be happy to share with you. But what did they say about the man, Nabal?
Jerk.
Yeah. That's what we call him modern day, wouldn't we? It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, he's not somebody that you'd want your daughter to marry. All right, so let's see what 1 Samuel 25, 9-13 says. When David's young men came, they said to all this to Nabal in the name of David, and then they waited. Now, I'll bet they were expecting a positive reply, don't you?
Sure.
And Nabal answered David's servants, "Who is David? Who is this son of Jesse? There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men who come from I don't know where?" Now, I'm sorry, but it just doesn't really ring true. Like you just said, a lot of people knew, but even if he didn't, that still wasn't very nice. So
Well, he
David's
insulted
young
all
men,
of them. He
what?
insulted the young men giving the message as much as he did David.
Yeah.
I know who you are. You could run away.
Yeah. And why should I give up my stuff to help you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this guy's got problems. So David's young men turned away and came back and told him all of this. Oh, now that would not, the old saying of don't kill the messenger for the message.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine that's not a message that David wanted to have.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what David had to say. And David said to his men, "Every man strap on his sword." And every man of them strapped on his sword, and David also strapped on his sword. And about 400 men went up after David, while 200 remained with the baggage. Now, I'm not the brightest candle in the box, but I don't think you strap on your sword if you're going to a party.
Mm-hmm.
You strap on your sword if you're about to do battle.
Right.
And David is righteously angry. And when I hear this, I think of that old saying, those are fighting words, because David is angry. What an insult. I can see now why scripture calls Nabal harsh and badly behaved. The New King James Version said that he was harsh and evil in his doings. Wow, this is some kind of character, isn't he? Shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
he have known who David was, Pam? I mean, is that a lie, or we don't know for sure, but what do you think?
Oh, he should have, and he probably did. But he was a greedy, self-serving, arrogant man. We don't know, but his politics may have been involved, like choosing Saul over David.
Hmm.
A man like this would have wanted to stay on the good side of whoever was in government power. This is not anything except a self-serving jerk. He's not going to
I
do
just,
it.
as I'm thinking about this, and I'm listening to the story being read, I just keep thinking this guy was a piece of work, and he had a real big idea of who he was and his importance and his greed. And I'm at this point, I'm kind of feeling sorry for him, because David, as you said earlier, was very good in battle.
Oh, yeah.
And this man didn't have a soldier army at his house. He had servants, he had sheep herders, he had shearers. And now David is coming with their swords strapped on. And it's not
He has
going to
no
be
idea.
pleasant for him if David gets to his house. So, can you keep us going on the story? Let's see what happens next.
Well, first of all, what we just said about this guy, all over the world right now, we've got leaders like this. There are people leading countries who have the same mindsets, the same attitudes as Nabal. And that's another thing so scary nowadays. But in all of our political realms, we've got people like this. In all of our business realms, we've got people like this.
Mm-hmm.
All about themselves, all about their arrogance, and all about thinking sideways like this guy does.
Well, and you know what I keep thinking is, we haven't finished the story, but when David's army arrives with those 200 men, or if David's army arrives, oh, you said 400 men?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, got the number wrong. Thank you. With 400 men, I don't see Nabal out there with his sword. I'm thinking he's going to be one of those guys that's hiding somewhere, expecting everybody else to take the fall for him. Now, again, we don't know. We're just talking about personalities here. But I think that would be kind of a logical conclusion
So
that he
too.
started this fight. But I don't see him to be the type person that would want to actually do the battle. But let's see what happens.
Okay, 1 Samuel 25, 14 to 19. Now one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, "Look, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, and he reviled them. But the men were very good to us, and we were not hurt, nor did we miss anything as long as we accompanied them. When we were in the fields, they were a wall to us both by night and day, all the time we were with them keeping the sheep. Now therefore know and consider what you will do, for harm is determined against our master and against all his household. For he is such a scoundrel that one cannot speak to him." Then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep already dressed, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs, and loaded them on donkeys. And he said to her servants, "Go on before me. See, I'm coming after you." But she did not tell her husband name. Smart woman.
Exactly.
Abigail has always been one of my favorite people from the Bible times. She's my definition of a lady.
Mm-hmm.
Could have gone and argued with her husband about his actions. She could have hidden from the conflict he was stirring up. She could have made several different choices. She chose to do what her husband should have done and showed hospitality and gratitude.
Okay, so I'm going to throw this at you. You weren't expecting this, but was she being in submission to her husband when she did this?
Well, it's how you look at the words. I mean, actually, she's doing something that's going to save his life.
Absolutely.
So even if he doesn't know it, and even if she isn't making ingratiating um words and appearance to him, she's not even talking to him. She's not challenging him. He hasn't told her what he wants to do.
That's true.
He
He
hasn't
didn't tell
said
her she
what
couldn't.
he hasn't talked to her at all. So she wouldn't have known about this if the servant hadn't been brave enough and trusted her enough to come and tell her. And that was really significant too, that the servant knew she would have more intelligence than the master did,
Yeah,
and trusted her to do something. But she made a decision without actually standing in his way because he didn't tell her, "I want this" or "I don't want that." So she's
true.
not violating his instruction.
True.
She is acting on his behalf.
Mm-hmm.
She may go ahead and admit to David some things that, they both knew about her husband, but she doesn't go and do something that's defiant against him. She's doing something protective. So
That's
I don't think that counts as being unsubmissive. But
I
even so,
think,
we actually had that instruction already back then.
yeah, I think you're right. I agree with you. But like you, I love it that the servants knew there would be no talking to him. There'd be no reason to go back to him and try to reason with him. He's not going to reason. But they knew that they could talk to Abigail, which says a lot about her personality, that she was approachable.
Mhm.
And the fact that the Bible calls him a scoundrel and says that no one could talk to him tells us that, we're right. And Abigail knew that too. And she didn't tell her husband what she was doing, but she did what she felt was needed. That was very smart and discerning, just like you said.
Yeah, you're right. Abigail was obviously a kind and approachable woman.
Mhm.
Even the servants felt they could talk to her about things like this.
She was very smart. She's kind of one of my female heroes of the Bible. She's one of my favorite stories
Wish
too.
I was her kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. 1 Samuel 25, 20 through 31 says, "And as she rode on the donkey," now let's go back. You read a lot of stuff she had. And I
Mhm.
think this was really interesting too, that she had so many raisin cakes, roasted grain, sheep already dressed. So they were already cooking and preparing and getting ready for this feast. And so she had all of these things, 200 loaves of bread. Now that took time to grind down the wheat and make it into let the yeast rise and bake it and all of that stuff. She had wine. She had all sorts of stuff that she could take. 100 clusters of raisins, 200 cakes of figs, and she loaded all of these on a donkey. And then Scripture tells us that she too rode on a donkey, which tells me that he had wealth too, because he had these animals you could ride. She wasn't walking. And as she rode on the donkey and came down under cover of the mountains, behold, David and his men came down towards her, and she met them. Now, that in my mind, when I am picturing that, that has got to be one frightening sight to see 400 men with swords attached headed your way, and you know why.
Right.
That if I had been Abigail, I think my heart would have dropped down to my stomach. And so we'll continue with the scripture. Now David had said, surely in vain I have guarded all this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him. And he has returned me evil for good. God do so to the enemies of David, more also, if by morning I leave so much as one male of all who belong to him. Wow. So not only was David planning on taking care of our good friend Nabal, he was also planning on wiping out every male there. So those servants had a reason to be afraid and a reason to go and talk to her. And David was completely justified in his anger. He's saying that his men took care of him and nothing happened to the sheep or the herd or anything. And that's exactly what the servant said. So everybody's in agreement on this. Okay, so now let's see what Miss Abigail can do. Going back to scripture. When Abigail saw David, she hurried and got down from the donkey and fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, on me alone, my Lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. Let not my Lord regard this worthless fellow Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. So she's telling it like it is. I think it's interesting, though, that she's saying, put the blame on me. Don't put it on him, because we know that he is a worthless fellow. That's exactly what his name meant. Back to scripture. But I, your servant, did not see the young man of my Lord whom you sent. Now then, my Lord, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from saving with your own hand, now let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my Lord be as Nabal. And now let his present that your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who follow my Lord. Please forgive the trespasses of your servant, for the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil shall not be found in you as long as you live. I love this. She is praising David. She's giving credit to God. And she's basically saying that the same thing happened to David's enemies that David said was going to happen to Nabal and his group. And then she says, if men arise up to pursue you and to seek your life, the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living in the care of the Lord your God. And the lives of your enemy he shall sling out from the hollow of a sling. And when the Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel, my Lord shall have no cause or of grief or pang of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for my Lord working salvation himself. And when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your servant. Man, she could have been an attorney. I mean, this is a beautiful explanation of all the reasons why you should not come in and do what you have planned. because it's going to give God glory. He's going to take care of your enemies. And then when you get to be king, you're not going to have anything to feel guilty about. You won't look back on this and regret that you had slaughtered these innocent servants because of their foolish master. And I love this. I think it's wow. I mean, surely this woman was a wonderful orator. And notice it says that David had said, if by morning I leave so much as one male of all of you who belong to him, David was planning some pretty scary things. So what does she do? First, she gets down off her donkey and she humbles herself before David. It says she puts her face to the ground. Then she agrees with David that Nabal is wicked and he's exactly what you say he is. And even his name says that. The Nabal means fool. Then she explains why she didn't do anything. I wasn't there. I didn't see your servants. I didn't hear what they said. And then this is the really cool, smart thing she did. She gives God the glory from stopping David from killing everyone. She didn't say, and because you listened to me, or because you were generous and forgave. She's giving God the glory. And then she tops it all off, icing on the cake, and she reminds him that he's going to be king one day. And when he's king, he is not going to have anything to have a guilty conscience about, and God is going to bless him for that. Wow.
And she is such a strategist.
Hmm.
She knows how to think. She very quickly understood all the ramifications of what was going on. She understood what was happening, why it was happening, what was going to happen if this. She had it all in her head,
Mhm.
and she figured out exactly how to approach it. As she's going down there, where most of us might have been terrified, thinking, "Please God, don't let him kill me when I come toward him,"
That's
which
right,
he
B.
could have, any of his men could have. She was focusing on what she was going to say and do. And she had God in mind. She had her dummy husband in mind. She had David's future in mind. She had everyone's welfare in mind. And she came at the whole situation from every angle and covered it
With humility.
with humility too. I mean, that's what part of the strategy.
Mhm.
She knew what she was doing. She knew what the priorities were, and she knew how to express them. She was a refined, wealthy woman, one with social stature. Should have been all about the dresses and the parties and social things, but she completely humbles herself in posture and in words.
Mhm.
And it tells us so much about her character.
Mhm.
What she says to David shows wisdom. She gives him such good advice.
Well,
This
I want to be Abigail when I grow up.
I do too. Oh, I do. She's just my idea of quintessential lady, just
Mhm.
is. Let's look at the rest of this. For Samuel 35, 32 to 35. And David said to Abigail, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you who have kept me this day from blood guilt and from working salvation with my own hand. For as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, truly by morning there had not been left to Nabal so much as one male." Then David received from her hand what she had brought him, and he said to her, "Go in peace to your house. See, I have obeyed your voice, and I have granted your petition." He obeyed her. The king obeyed her voice. And
That is pretty significant wording.
yeah, especially since what was going to happen next. I do spoilers, I can't help it. But the other thing is he also recognized what he knew about God but had ignored because he was so angry.
Mm,
She put him in mind of, it's God's business. It's God's situation to handle, not yours.
exactly.
And so he let her teach him. He let her change his mind, teach him, and show him a good example. It- she it was all perfect. It's just neat. I wonder if he's remembering his own words of faith when he killed Goliath, though. He said
Mm,
then that the victory would be God's and not his.
hmm.
And here he seems to see that this situation was also best trusted to God instead of taking his own revenge, thanks to Abigail's words.
Yeah, I think, men need women sometimes to talk them down because I know, a lot of times a man's first reaction is going to be something physical. Um, uh, I've, the ministry that you and I both are in to help adult survivors of the endured childhood abuse women. Um, I was talking to a couple at Last Leaders not too long ago, and I made the comment about, yeah, the Bible has an answer for everything. But if you've just found out that your daughter has been raped, I can't point you to an exact book and an exact verse to tell you what to say to her and what resources are available in your area and what you should do next. And the guy, he did exactly what all the other men have ever done that I told that to. He just kind of shook his head. He said, "Nope, I wouldn't need to know any of that. I know what I do." And I mean, it was all over his face that he planned on taking action. And so David was in that action mode, but everything that she did played beautifully to calm him down. And as
Mhm.
you said, make him think. And I think it's very refreshing that he did use the word obey. And I
Mhm.
also think it's refreshing that he admits that he's reminding her of God. And I just think that's amazing. And I want to be Abigail when I grow up.
She brought him back to what he was inside. She made him
Yes.
listening to his heart rather than his mind.
She reminded him who he was, what his goals were, what his objectives were. He did not retaliate when Saul was after him. But I think too, just something I'm thinking about as we're talking, that um, the old saying, "You can do anything you want to me, but don't mess with my kids." He
Mhm.
had all of these men that had worked very hard and they needed that food. This was not just, we want to be invited to a party. He had to find a way to feed these men and to take care of these men.
Right.
And to have his men snubbed after they had, because we don't know exactly what all happened while they were out there with the shepherds. We just know that the shepherds said they protected us. And so he was angry. All right, let's keep going.
Well, one thing before you go past that point you just made,
Okay.
David, what we know about David as a human being tells us a lot of what were happening with those shepherds in the field. He was naturally a person who would step up when he saw something that needed to happen or someone that needed protection. We can see him being that kind of a man.
Yes.
So as he and his soldiers were going along, seeing shepherds out in the field and knowing what their issues were, it would have been natural for him to say, you know what, we're here, we can do this. Let's go ahead and just watch out for them for a while.
Hmm.
I can see that fitting in everything else we know about his personality and his commitment to people and to God.
Yeah.
So it's a natural assumption that he did that out of a desire to help.
Yes.
But he also had these men he had to take care of and feed. So it would also be natural for him to assume that, we did this. We didn't do it for compensation, maybe, but compensation would be a reasonable thing to ask for. So let's
Yeah. Now
just,
that you're having a party and you've got all this food and you're wealthy and,
yeah,
probably it wouldn't hurt this man to feed. I mean, was he said 400 with him and 100 was left
200,
behind.
200 with the baggage.
So that's
Baggage.
600 men. That's a lot of men to feed. That's a lot of extra mouths to feed. But obviously, Nabal had plenty of food.
Oh, yeah.
So he wasn't asking the man to go without eating to help feed us.
Right.
Just it was, share some of the wealth with us.
Hmm.
So, all right, let's see what happens. 1 Samuel 25:36-38. And Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he was holding a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. See, that tells you right there. Even after she gave all of that big long list that you read of stuff, he still got plenty of food for a feast. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. So she told him nothing at all until the morning light. In the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. And about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal and he died. Wow. He became like a stone. I think maybe he had a stroke or something.
I've always thought so.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. But again, Abigail shows wisdom because she had told Nabal when he was drunk, it probably wouldn't have sunk in. It wouldn't have meant anything to him. But when he was sober, he fully understood what she saved him from.
Well, he might have, when he was still drunk, he might have reacted like a drunk might and lashed out at her or
Ah,
something else. He
yeah.
might have gotten more angry. We don't know, but he wouldn't have thought, obviously he doesn't do that well. But when she told him in that morning light, I think he knew what was happening. I think he
Yes.
knew exactly she had saved him from.
Yes.
That probably struck the whole thing out. But whatever it was, David didn't do it. God did it.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, God's way is always best. And as you say, no one but the guilty man died. I've often wondered if Nabal died from a stroke, like you did.
Yeah.
But whatever it was God's doing. So let's see what happens next.
Okay.
Verses 39 to 42. And when David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, Blessed be the Lord who has avenged the insult I received at the hand of Nabal and has kept back his servant from wrongdoing. The Lord has returned the evil of Nabal on his own head. Then David sent and spoke to Abigail to take her as his wife. When the servants of David came to Abigail at Carmel, they said to her, David has sent us to take you to him as his wife. And she rose and bowed with her face to the ground and said, Behold, your handmaid is a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord. And Abigail hurried and rose and mounted a donkey, and her 5 young women attended her. She followed the messengers of David and became his wife. Now, we don't know how much later it was that David heard that Nabal had died.
Mm,
There should have been a mourning period before Abigail would marry again, but David, as the true king, and Abigail, as the widow of an abusive man, should have been able to marry as soon as possible.
mm.
Deserved a chance at love and happiness. And to me, she and David had a love story.
So would all these possessions and servants that this man owned, I guess that would go to his relatives
Probably to the next male.
in the family.
I
So
don't know if
she,
David was following that kind of law or not, but I think that would be normal.
I know that was part of the Jewish law that if a man didn't have children and he died, that the brother was supposed to take the wife and raise up children in his name. That had to do with
Mhm.
the land and all of that stuff. And I often used to tease when we were younger. I often used to tease my husband's brother that, hey, you better hope he doesn't die, because if he dies, you get me. And he was like, no. So I mean, she could have, if they were still doing that at this time and place, she could have ended up having to marry someone that she didn't want to marry.
Could be. She probably
But
didn't want to marry Nabal either.
no, that's what, you know what? I bet you're right. Arranged marriages were a thing,
Mhm.
but I think to be married to the king, that'd be kind of cool, especially
Mhm.
somebody like David. I think that would be kind of cool. And I'd love the story because of the humility and the strength that Abigail showed. And we both kind of talked about that.
Mhm.
All right. I got a couple of things that we can learn from the story, but did you have anything you wanted to say before I moved on?
No, we're good. Keep
Okay.
going.
All right. So only have two this time, ladies. Sorry. Um, it's possible to be a godly woman, even if your husband, boss, roommate, neighbor, parent, classmate, guardian is not. Nabal was a terrible man, but Abigail did not allow her circumstances as his wife to change her values and dedication to God. And I think that's incredibly important. I have known women that go to church without their husbands. I've known women that raise godly children, even though their husband had no faith. So it doesn't, yes, we become as one, and yes, we are in submission to our husbands, but there is still a way, as we've talked about earlier, to be in submission and still live for the Lord. Of course, it says, we're supposed to be in submission as long as it doesn't directly conflict with what God says, because what God says is always first. So, and then the next thing I notice is there is really great power in humility. And, the world doesn't look at it that way. We look at humility to being weakness, or, somebody that you would have no power. But both David and Abigail showed tremendous humility. And I think you pointed that out beautifully when you quoted David as saying he obeyed her voice,
Mhm.
and he was willing to back down because he had made, some men might have been concerned. Well, I made this big fuss with the men and got everybody all riled up. We got our swords on, so we got our swords on, so we have to have our battle. But that's not what he did.
Mm-mm.
He true humility says that God is the extreme power. And when we let go and we let God by being humble, God's going to do things that we never saw possible. I mean, look what he did to Nabal. Nabal didn't last very long, but David didn't have to kill him. David didn't have to have that blood on his hands. But before God can do anything with us, we have to be humble enough to submit to him and to wait.
That waiting is the hard part, but I like what you're talking about. David, what he could have been. David was macho in the realest sense. I mean, he was strong and
Handsome.
determined and brave and all these things, but he wasn't controlled by that.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that he could back off and change direction when he was shown some wisdom, even by a woman, because he had that ability to hear good advice and to change direction based on it. That to me was the biggest sign of manliness and strength that I could have imagined.
Yeah.
It's a lot more than someone who would be like most fierce soldiers would be we got a battle to fight, we're gonna go fight it, just get out of the way.
Right.
He had that kind of real in him. It was real manliness, real intelligence, real wisdom.
Real power. Real
And
power.
really, that's good, really power. Um, but I also like the word wait in there, what you were saying, because there's so much power in waiting, and it is so hard to do. When somebody can wait and trust God and see that there might be a way other than what we thought is the answer, that's power too. And it really is. It's amazing.
And that's one of the things I'm still working on, ladies.
Me too,
Still
constantly.
working on patience. And I mean, I trust God. I absolutely trust God. But sometimes I fall into that trap of, well, God might need a little help.
Yeah, I always do that and planning things for him. Like, here's how I think you could do this, okay? But then I keep trying to think of Isaiah when he said, "Trust in the Lord with all things," and
And lean not on your own
and
understanding.
then that wait on the Lord shall renew their strength and
Yes.
rise up like eagles. I keep trying to keep that in my head, but it doesn't stay very long. I keep having to pull that thought back in.
Well, I know that I'm not waiting appropriately
Mm,
if I'm not gaining strength.
this is
Because
true.
if you're waiting on the Lord the right way, you can run without being weary and you can walk without fainting. And uh, but if you don't wait on the Lord in the right way, you're going to be exhausted from
And it'll
pacing
go
and
off.
fretting and
And you'll miss
thinking.
blessings. You'll miss blessings that he would have.
Yes, you do.
It shouldn't be, but it's hard sometimes to remind ourselves that God always has a better plan
He does.
and the best timing for any situation we face. Taking everything to him in prayer and then trusting that he knows what's best. That's our best chance for peace in our lives.
It's really our only chance for peace in our lives. Because if we don't turn it over and let go and let God, we're going to constantly be toiling and spinning.
Mhm.
And God's way is always best. So, well, I think I'm going to go and have my name changed to Abigail. And then maybe I'll be more like her.
Dream on. I don't think it works that way, but okay.
Oh, you burst all my bubbles.
I try. I keep everything handy at all times. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard being my friend, y'all. Just know that. It takes a lot of patience and wisdom. Oh, goodness. All right. Well, ladies, thank you for joining us today for another podcast with Brenda Porch and Pam Baggett from the Your Love Ministry. And we hope you'll come back and join us again some other time because you just never know what we're going to be talking about. Y'all have a blessed day.